So, good evening. The last 3 trading days on the financial markets here worldwide have been basically a bloodbath. And I hope you, the viewer, was not too hurt by this of what you have experienced here, which is basically a market crash over a 3-day period, trading day period starting Thursday, Friday, and then today. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this, and the reason why is you as the viewer may not fully understand of what the purpose is of what we're trying to accomplish here in the United States, and it looks like blank insanity, which it probably is. But like I said before, there's a method to the madness. I'm not trying to offend President Trump here with his trade tariffs, of what he's trying to do, but I want to give you a slight background. My business is electronics. I design and manufacture electronics for the industrial automation market and for the military, so control applications, basically. Man-machine interfaces, operators to operate numerical machines, CNC machines, all sorts of stuff, and everything that interacts with these machines on the communications levels and sensor interfaces and that sort of stuff. That's what we're building and what we have been building. I had, in 1994, when I really started my business here in Kansas City, about 50 to 60 customers in the Midwest, going from Wisconsin all the way down to Texas and from Colorado all the way to Ohio. That was the area which we covered. And out of those 50 to 60 customers, we had these were all businesses who also were in the business of producing something, a wide variety of different products. I don't want to go into the details. But out of those 60 companies, roughly, there's only 5 of them left, and only 2 of them are still producing in the Midwest the same way they did in 1994. The other ones were either bought up, consolidated, and closed down, or they shifted their manufacturing from the United States to Asia, primarily to China. Some of them went down to Mexico through NAFTA. And others, they basically just closed down altogether. They basically finished. They were done. And this is something what Trump is trying to reestablish, is the manufacturing base here in the United States. Now, as in Europe, as well here in the United States, the offshoring, what we normally call this, started in the mid-1960s. And Japan was the emerging market for semiconductors in consumer electronics. That covered everything from reel-to-reel tape players, cassette tape players, VCRs, televisions, stereos, boom boxes, Walkmans, camcorders, the whole array. That put the traditional German manufacturers of home electronics or consumer electronics out of business pretty much by the mid-1970s or early 1980s at the latest. Philips, the larger European company which built a lot of this stuff, their division, the electronics, consumer electronics division, went basically under. Grundig, Telefunken, Saba, Löwe Opta. I mean, there's like 15 companies in Germany which basically were driven close to bankruptcy because of the competition from Japan in that market. And that was really the beginning of globalization. During this time period of the 1970s, Chinese-made products were already available in Europe and in the United States, and they were funneled through Hong Kong out into these markets because Europe, Western Europe at that time, and the United States had trade embargoes with China because they were communists. So you couldn't trade. We still today in 2024 2025, sorry, we cannot trade with Cuba, because of their communist nature from the United States. We cannot export or import anything legally from Cuba, just that you have an idea. And it basically progressed from there. By the time I got to the United States, the sector which was still working with manufacturing was basically everything what we would consider business to business, kind of the more expensive products. And that was primarily office products, computers, printers, scanners, fax machines, and that sort of stuff of a higher quality. There was some of this low-end stuff already coming into the country, primarily out of now South Korea, which had taken a place from Japan in that sector, basically. And so we kind of had that business-to-business sector left. That means we still built like shop equipment for wood crafters and metal shops and that sort of stuff. And there was a wide variety of businesses here. And the U.S. car manufacturers were making all of their parts were built here. All of the gaskets and whatever goes into a car and seals and God knows what else was all made in the United States. The same it was over in Germany. And then they came with NAFTA, and the car manufacturers started to move some of these productions of this lower end stuff out to Mexico and to Canada for the metal part working, for metal parts primarily. And then China entered the picture in 1999 with becoming a member of the World Trade Organization, the WTO. And that spelled pretty much the end of it. And in this process now, the Chinese have taken the industrial control equipment market, basically everything with this electromechanical contactors, switches, push buttons, terminal blocks, and that sort of stuff over. They got basically a global monopoly on these parts at the moment. There's nothing made here in the United States. Relays, for instance, you cannot buy any more relays here in the United States. We have only a very few relays left. They're being made here. They have military and space applications for those. They cost $500, $600 for a little tiny relay, which can withstand extremely cold temperatures, down to minus 80 degrees Celsius. And that sort of stuff. So only extremely expensive and highly complicated stuff is still being made here, but it is in very small quantities, and it may employ a couple hundred people, 500 people at the very most, with the quantities we need them in. But the rest of it all left. So, and with this we have now gotten a trade deficit. That means the country is flowing, the money is flowing out of the country. So when we print $100 billion and we spend $50 billion on Chinese products, half of that money we printed basically leaves the United States and it winds up in China. And because China is a communist country, a government-controlled country, the companies, the Chinese companies or the US companies or European companies are required to basically exchange the US dollars or euros with the Chinese central bank into Chinese currency. With this, the Chinese government basically winds up with the 50 billion, just a number, just to give you some math, 50 billion US dollars we send over there because we got merchandise in return. They take now those 50 billion and they invest it either in other countries. They lend that money out to African nations, to Latin American nations, or they're buying US debt where we have to pay them then interest on top of that from the money they gave us back, basically of our own money. So the common wisdom in this is to stop this, is you're trying to get in equilibrium. That means that the Chinese are interested in buying $50 billion worth from us in American-made products, which there are not many to begin with. In this way, the Chinese consumers who have Chinese currency would go to their local bank in China, and they would exchange this to US dollars from what the Chinese government had gotten from the incoming money. And it would come back then to the United States, companies here who built something, who sold their product over. That would be the ideal situation when you have a equalized trade between two nations. That is the ideal situation. So this way, neither one of the two central banks winds up with any excess amount of the other country's currency. So everything stays in an equilibrium. Money going out is the same as the money coming back in. That keeps your circulation of money in that economy stable. Once this goes off balance, the only option you have is to basically put tariffs in place to make the foreign product so expensive that in competition, the local products can compete. So in China, we have a significant difference in pay scale for the same amount or the same type of work, what the workers are getting paid versus the United States. That creates a incentive to actually have something manufactured in China rather than here. The only way you can protect then the local market is by imposing tariffs on incoming merchandise which was manufactured in the other country. That seems to be a logic consequence. This is protectionist, a protective economical system, and this will only work as long as the tariffs are in place. So President Trump has been pretty firm for the last 4 days or so with keeping the tariffs in place. And today he seems to be caving in because he said already that that might be negotiable. The problem with this is the idea is what he said was he would create jobs in America, manufacturing jobs. He wants manufacturing companies to come over here from other countries and produce it here, produce their products here in the United States to circumvent the tariffs, employing American people. But this will only work if he stays firm on the tariffs. If he does not stay firm on the tariffs, this entire dream about making America a manufacturing country again is going to go up in smoke, literally. And this is now the big question. No investor is going to bring any money here to the United States as long as President Trump is going to do the song and dance with these tariffs. Yes, we're going to negotiate. No, we're not going to go. We need to know which way is he going to go. Do you want manufacturing here, or you want to renegotiate trade barriers and tariffs with other nations? Elon Musk, of course, has a self-invested interest with his company, as he would like to see zero, taxes or tariffs between Europe and the United States, because this way he can send his cars forwards and backwards without having any tariffs on there. And that would benefit his company greatly, but it would be no incentive for any European manufacturer to come over here and establish jobs or create jobs here in the United States for the products the European manufacturer sells into the US market. So this is the big question, and no one knows this unless we have, some clarity of when he really says or makes up his mind which way he wants to go. No one is going to make any determination to invest money here in the United States and create jobs. That's one thing. And the other thing is the market turmoil, the crash we had now for 4 days, is going to keep continuing, because you have absolutely no more certainty which way this is going to go. US manufacturers don't know at this point if they should bring manufacturing capabilities back from China here in the United States, which is going to take time and investment in order to get this restarted here, because we have, like I said, I think since the beginning of NAFTA, which was like in 96 or so, 90,000 manufacturing businesses have completely closed down here in the United States. That's a lot, 90,000 businesses. which were involved in manufacturing. Unless Trump clearly comes out and says, this is the way we're going to go, or this is the way we're going to go. We're either going to have tariffs until doomsday, or we're going to renegotiate. You can't come out and say, well, I'm going to renegotiate with this country and that country, but what are you going to do with the other then? Not renegotiate anything? Or Vietnam is now coming and saying, well, we're going to do it for zero tariffs. That's the next country. No more tariffs on U.S. products coming in. Like I said, there's not much to be shipped from here. Primarily what we're looking at when we're talking export here from the United States, that is military stuff, which is controlled anyway. Then you have agricultural products, primarily soya beans, and pork, pork and beef. So food items, that comes from the United States. And then services, accounting services, legal services, that kind of stuff. This is what we're talking at export. There's only a few vehicles made here in the United States which actually go to Europe or to China, because the American car manufacturers have facilities in Europe and in China where they are building the American brand cars in the EU or in China to begin with. So there's only Harley-Davidson might be one of those companies which is still exporting to a certain extent. These name brands we have, and then you have whiskey. But other than that, there's some business stuff, medical stuff, medications, but we are a net importer of medications today, and especially on the basic substances, on the raw materials to make medications, we're importing. We no longer produce this stuff either. There's virtually no more steel produced here, no more aluminum produced, and there's virtually no more mining activity in terms of copper, iron ore, or coal. Coal, yes, that is exported. Oil, we're exporting. We're exporting light sweet crude oil, which is easier to be refined, and we're buying the sour crude from the Middle East, because during the 60s, that oil was so cheap, it was cheaper to buy Saudi Arabian oil in the 1960s than it was actually drilling oil here. So the entire petrol industry in the United States was converted from light sweet crude oil, which we produce here, which we get here as oil, as crude oil, and we shifted over to the heavier sour crude Brent out of the Middle East. And they require, because of the high sulfur content, a very different refining process than light sweet crude does, because it has by far less sulfur. So we are exporting our low sulfur oil, crude oil, mostly to Europe and other nations, and we are importing all of our oil. This is how crazy this all is, because of the existing refineries from the Middle East. So this is where this all comes in. So we have with certain countries trade balances, so you can't really say, go to Saudi Arabia and say, look, we're buying 120 billion or whatever million barrels from you per year for your crude oil, so you should buy 120 million barrels of crude oil from us so we get an even trade going. These things will not really add up in this. The wise people have proclaimed that this is the end of globalization as we know it. I don't think so, until Trump gives us a clear idea in which way this is going to go. I'm at the sidelines right now, and I'm not the only one. One of the richest guys here in the country has set his money to the sidelines too for quite some time now, in anticipation of this year, what we're seeing now. And that is Warren Buffett up in Omaha, Nebraska. And so we have gotten this now. We are out of the loop here for the better part who saw this coming. I had expected this, what we're seeing now, to be happening actually in 2021, because I had expected, I have to say it that way, that Trump would win the election in 2020 when he lost, or they stole it, or it got lost in the shovel, whatever. However you want to look at it, I'm not going to get involved in that part of it. But he didn't become president again. So we had now this 4-year lapse with Biden and his agenda. And now we're shifting this back to a time where we would have been, or where Trump is trying to go to, at least this is what he has been telling us, but that is with renegotiating these tariffs is not going to happen, is to go back like where we were in the 1950s and 1960s, when most of the stuff, say like 80% or so, was produced here for the United States, in the United States. From consumer stuff, clothing, agricultural food items, everything, cars, vehicles, televisions, and everything else what came with it was manufactured here for the domestic market. Some stuff, very few things were exported. Export things were Hewlett-Packard in those years, HP test equipment, laboratory equipment, very expensive, very good. IBM with their mainframe computers, that was a big thing. And there were several other, these semiconductors, National Semiconductor, Texas Instrument, Motorola, and those companies, they were all making stuff here and exporting it. That was the biggest, export items. That's when things were actually physically shipped out. Motorola no longer exists. National Semiconductor was bought up by Texas Instrument, and Texas Instrument makes most of their semiconductors now in China. So there's very little produced here. Analog devices is still around. They're still making a majority of parts here in the United States, semiconductors, primarily analog, integrated circuits, digital signal processors, and that sort of stuff. But otherwise, that low-end stuff all went. So did most of the electronic manufacturers who made resistors, who made capacitors. All of the stuff had moved for years now overseas, and a big chunk of this went to China. Some of it is made in Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, and in Taiwan. That's the primary destinations for these products when they're offshored. So this gives you an idea. Unless we have clarity, and he says absolutely no negotiations on the tariffs whatsoever, we're going to become a manufacturing country, or we're going to renegotiate, and then the manufacturing is going to fall out of the bottom, basically, in this for the United States. Everything stays the same, just with different tariff or trade, agreements between the United States and other nations. And that is a question no one can answer, because Trump seems to flip-flop quite a bit on stuff. And until we have some certainty in this, no one is going to invest any money. So in general, as long as this limbo is going to go on here, we can say is that the market here will basically, everything will slow down from business activity and consumer spending. You will see probably some form of a recession, and we're probably going to see 3 to 5 reductions in interest rates by the Federal Reserve. This is my anticipation just for this year alone, to buffer this whole slowdown which is going to take place now in this, until the market has figured out of what Trump is trying to figure out, or has figured out, or has not figured out. We will see what way he's going to go there. And that was my 25 cents. And with that, you have a great night.